I never really believed in ghosts or the paranormal until I took the overnight security job at the old Franklin Mill. The pay was decent, and I figured working nights would give me more time during the days to focus on my art. Plus, I liked the quiet solitude of being alone at night. Or at least that's what I thought before my first shift. The mill had been abandoned for decades, but was just recently purchased by a developer who planned to turn it into loft apartments. My job was to keep watch at night, while the construction crews worked during the day. I would do rounds throughout the massive complex, make sure no trespassers or vandals got in, and just keep an eye on things in general. On my first night on the job, I arrived a little before sunset. My supervisor gave me a quick tour, showing me the maze of dark brick buildings, the old equipment covered in years of dust and cobwebs, and the long passageways that snaked between the different areas of the mill. He told me the whole complex covered about 10 acres. "This place can be a little spooky at night," he said with a chuckle, "especially if your imagination gets carried away. But don't worry. I've worked here for years and haven't seen anything too weird." He assured me it was a pretty simple gig, just walk around and make sure nothing was out of the ordinary. He gave me a flashlight, a two-way radio, a set of keys, and the security code to arm and disarm the alarm system. Then he took off, leaving me on my own in the big empty mill. As the last hints of daylight disappeared, I began my first patrol. My flashlight cast jagged shadows against the brick walls. The old machinery threw twisted shapes across the rooms. The place smelled of rust and damp with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place, almost sweet but not quite pleasant. I followed the predetermined route, shining my light down hallways and stairwells as I walked. Other than the echoes of my footsteps, the complex was silent. The kind of heavy, thick silence that presses against your eardrums. A few times I thought I heard whispers or faint cries in the distance, but when I stopped to listen more closely, I only heard the pounding of my own heart. Must be this old building playing tricks on my mind, I figured. As I continued my patrol, the shadows seemed to move and slide along the edges of my vision. I chalked it up to nerves and tried to focus on the task at hand. Room after room was still and empty, filled only with broken equipment and debris that had gathered over the decades. Then I came to a large open area that looked almost like an indoor courtyard. There was a glass ceiling about 3 stories up that let in faint moonlight. In the center stood what appeared to be a dried-up stone fountain. The moonlight reflecting off its surface cast an eerie glow across the room. As I panned my flashlight across the walls, something suddenly made me catch my breath. On the wall to my left, amidst all the grime and peeling paint, was a huge, dark stain that looked unmistakably like blood. It ran several feet down the bricks, its edges faded and blurred. I stared at it for a long moment, a chill running down my spine. Had someone been hurt here, or killed? I knew the mill's history was checkered with accidents and even a few worker deaths back in its heyday. But that was decades ago, wasn't it? I forced myself to keep moving. Just an old stain, I told myself. Probably rust or machine oil that leaked years ago. But still, the metallic iron-rich scent of the air took on a more sinister feel. The next few hours remained uneventful, just empty rooms and darkened halls filled only with shadows and echoes. By the time I finished my patrol and ended up back at the security office, I had nearly convinced myself the old mill held nothing sinister. I sat down and kicked my feet up on the desk, grateful for the cozy pool of light cast by the single bulb in the ceiling lamp. The night was half over. I could relax for a bit before making my next round. As I started to doze off, I was jolted awake by the sudden slamming of a heavy door somewhere out in the mill. The echoes reverberated through the walls. I sat upright, pulse quickening. Had a door blown open somewhere? Or was there someone else inside? I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed out to investigate. The noise seemed to have come from an area on the far south side, so I hurried down the stairs and through a passage leading in that direction. I scoured each room and hallway, flashing my light in every corner. Nothing. I was just about to turn back when a low scraping noise stopped me in my tracks. It was coming from a storage room up ahead. The door was slightly ajar. I inched forward silently, heart thudding. Sweeping my light through the narrow opening, I saw nothing but old wooden crates and rusty tools scattered across the floor. Just as I was about to pull the door open wider, an ear-splitting metallic crash exploded from somewhere inside the room, making me nearly jump out of my skin. I staggered back, gasping. When I caught my breath and shone my light inside again, everything was still. No movement, no signs of an intruder, yet I couldn't escape the bone-chilling feeling that someone or something was in that room with me, watching me, toying with me. I decided to end my patrol early and spend the rest of the night locked safely in the office. I practically ran back, continuously glancing over my shoulder with the unshakable sense that I was being followed. Once back in the office, I locked the door and sat curled up on the couch, flashlight in hand. As much as I tried to convince myself I was letting my imagination run wild, I couldn't explain away the sounds I'd heard. The sweet yet sickly scent lingered in the air. The vivid bloodstain, the inexplicable slamming and scraping. Maybe my supervisor was right about this place being spooky. I must have dozed off at some point because suddenly I jerked awake to find it was after 3 a.m. Rubbing my eyes, I got up to make another round of the mill before daybreak. I had a job to do, whether or not I liked it. The minute I stepped out of the office, I once again had the creeping, hair-raising sensation of unseen eyes following me. But every time I spun around to check, there was nothing there. Just dust and shadows and endless empty rooms. My flashlight began flickering as I walked, like something was interfering with its battery connection. I banged it against my hand a few times, and the beam returned to full strength. Weird. The batteries were brand new, probably just faulty manufacturing. I was passing through a derelict workshop when a bone-chilling draft of freezing air suddenly blasted down from overhead. It felt as if a huge sub-zero wave had been aimed straight at me. Icy tendrils coiled around my neck and limbs. When I looked up, there was a gaping hole in the ceiling where decaying wood had collapsed. Wispy moonlight filtered in. No vents, ductwork, or anything to explain where the intense blast of frigid air could have come from. I quickly moved on, struggling to fight off a creeping sense of panic. Maybe sleep deprivation was getting to me, playing tricks on my mind. I just needed to get through this night. In the next cavernous chamber, I noticed a faint orange glow pulsing against the far wall. Like firelight, I crept closer, praying it was just a reflection or something electrical. But no. A small fire was actively burning about 20 feet away, consuming a pile of wooden pallets and cardboard boxes. Within seconds, it had erupted into leaping flames, which crawled rapidly across the old wood and peeling wallpaper. I watched in horrified disbelief. How had it started so fast? There were no light switches or power sources in here that could spark a fire. It had just ignited spontaneously. I radioed emergency services as I hunted for an extinguisher. But even as I started spraying the chemical foam, the fire seemed to intensify, completely unnatural and animalistic in the way it boiled and snapped. Oily smoke filled the air, making me choke as I emptied extinguisher after extinguisher to no effect. Panicking, I finally ran from the room just as the overhead beams ignited with a deafening crackle. I didn't know what the hell was going on here, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I raced blindly through the dark halls and stairwells, weaving between rooms at random, praying I didn't get lost in this maze. It felt like I was trapped in some sadistic obstacle course designed for my torment. Just as I turned a corner on the bottom floor, something heavy struck me hard from behind. I sprawled forward, my flashlight skittering away across the floor and leaving me in darkness. Dazed, I crawled forward frantically, feeling for the light, as icy panic coursed through my veins. My fingers finally closed around the metal and I flipped it on, revealing nothing behind me but empty air. I wanted to scream, to curl up in a ball and cry. I didn't know what was happening, but this place was alive and infested with something evil. Not human, but cunning. And it clearly didn't want me here. Fueled by pure adrenaline now, I sprinted through the maze of halls and stairwells. I didn't know if I was headed for the exit or running myself deeper into this madness. I just knew I had to escape. Suddenly, I collided with a tall, solid figure right in front of me. Arms flailing, my flashlight flew from my grasp once again, shattering this time as it hit the ground. I stumbled back in blind fear, bracing for an attack as a menacing shadow loomed before me. Then a familiar voice yelled, "Hey, it's me!" My supervisor grabbed my shoulders and shook me into focus. The emergency crews he'd called were arriving outside, and he wanted to get me out safely. With his flashlights beamed to guide us, we finally made it out a side door. The fresh air had never felt so heavenly. As the fire trucks rushed past us into the burning mill, he asked if I was okay, and what the hell happened in there. With the ghostly image of that bloodstain still floating in my mind, I just shook my head in mute terror. I didn't want to seem crazy. All I said was I thought I'd heard and seen some weird things. He nodded grimly as he watched the raging fire through the windows. "Maybe it's for the best that the old place burns down," he muttered. "There's been stories about that mill for a long time. Stories that maybe should have been told before they sent someone in there alone at night," I thought bitterly. But it didn't matter now. It was over. I was alive. Or at least that's what I tried to tell myself over and over in the following days and weeks. I quit the security job, of course. Tried to get on with my life, but I couldn't shake the lingering sense I was still being watched, and I kept hearing whispers at odd hours, catching flickers of movement from the corners of my eyes. My friends said I seemed jumpy and paranoid. I stopped hanging out with people because I didn't want them to think I was losing it. I even went to get checked out by a doctor, heart, brain, vision, everything, but he said I was perfectly healthy. Sometimes I wonder if whatever evil presence was in that mill attached itself to me and somehow followed me home, watching, waiting, biding its time for reasons I may never understand. So if you ever take on a security job, especially in an old abandoned building with a checkered past, I have one piece of advice. Don't do it. Just don't. Because even if you make it out alive, you may not make it out alone.